My name is Craig Race. As Chris mentioned, I am an architect. At my firms, we design custom homes, multiplexes, and small apartment buildings. My company, Lanescape, also designs and builds laneway houses. I used to live in the beach, and I now live in Riverdale. So I'm very excited this fall to vote for Brad Bradford still, and vote for whoever's running against Paula Fletcher at the same time. It's pretty exciting for me. I find trees frustrating, and I want to see jets land on that island. Come talk to me later. So this is a little bit of repeat from what other people have gone through today. So I really want to focus on the acceleration that we've seen since last year's Missing Middle Summit, kind of take us summit to summit, and hopefully try to be grateful for the progress that's been made. I remember like it was just yesterday when secondary suites became a thing in Toronto about a quarter of a century ago. In that time, we had triplexes trickle into the R zone, a couple other policies that didn't really get enacted citywide, and it took us 18 years before we got to the laneway policy. Shortly after that, 4 years later, garden suites came into effect. And then the year after that, we started to see multiplexes. So there has been an acceleration of new housing policy that has been allowing us to disrupt our neighborhoods with infill housing. But it's continuing to accelerate at a rate that I think should make us all really happy. Because since last year's summit, we've seen sixplexes be enacted in Toronto, East York. We've seen semi-detached fourplexes be enacted citywide. We've seen major streets come into effect, so we can do 6 stories in some areas, even though it usually doesn't make sense. And MTSAs and PMTSAs are giving us a new policy framework to continue to crack open our neighborhoods with these exact typologies where we have reasonable access to transit. I want to run everyone through the policies quickly and just kind of talk about what we're seeing in them. When sixplexes came into effect, probably the best part of that was that the development charge bylaw changed with it. So when we got the sixplex plus the ADU permitted for sites in Toronto, the development charge bylaw also exempted development charges and parkland for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th unit, and we can defer it on the accessory dwelling unit. So we can build 7 units DC free. A fun fact about that is that although the sixplex typology was limited in its as-of-right framework to Toronto, East York, the development charge exemptions were not limited. So should you get approval for 6 units on a major street or in an MTSA, or just through minor variances elsewhere, you can still get those development charge exemptions applied to your development. That's been a big difference maker. There's still a lot of room to go on this. There's a bedroom limit that drives me crazy. The geographic limitation of it, I think, is something we can continue to explore. Like, for example, applying sixplexes to major streets would be a dream. We're also having a lot of code issues. There are non-combustible construction concerns, fire-rated windows and fire shutters, requirements to sprinkler when you get a possible 4th story. Those are all being ironed out. And I'm constantly frustrated by them, but I also am really appreciative that since last year's summit, we couldn't do this, and now we can. So those are problems I'm happy to have. To just explore where we can do sixplexes as of right, for anyone who doesn't know, it's Toronto East York wards plus Ward 23, which is Scarborough North. Semi-detached houseplexes have also come into effect. This still has a lot of room to go, I think. All this allows us to do is attach fourplexes. So if you have 5 or 6 units, you cannot attach them, or if you do, they'll be considered apartment buildings and you're going to committee of adjustment. But the fact that the typology is starting to become acceptable has allowed us to really start to combine sites and or get severances and continue to multiply that development charge exemption. So a lot of our clients will find an unusually wide site, we'll sever it. We will go to committee for 2 semi-detached sixplexes and 2 semi-detached garden suites or laneway suites. Those development charge exemptions continue to multiply, even if you have to use minor variances to go beyond this typology. So it's still limited. I think it has room to grow, but we couldn't do this at last year's summit. So the fact that this is now encoded in our bylaws, and I can go to committee and hold up council-approved policy saying that we're pretty close to the mark, has been a huge difference maker. Quick note, any semi-detached houseplexes are not permitted in RD zones. So a lot of our neighborhoods are RD once you get outside the core. If you're assessing a property, keep an eye out for that. Major streets has come into effect. We've been talking about that a lot today. 6 stories is great. We're finding that when you have a site that's probably less than 100 feet of frontage, certainly less than 75 feet of frontage, by the time we have an elevator, exit stairs, common space, we end up with the same amount of leasable area if we just do multiplexes and severances on a site. So we're coming up with some efficiency issues on this. If you don't have a particularly wide site, it's probably not going to be viable. But the good news is that those policies I mentioned previously allow you to get the same amount of density just through severances. And while this typology usually has more than 6 units, we can use the multiplex typology to avoid DCs and hopefully simplify servicing. Major streets, for anyone that doesn't know, are all over the city, and they're fantastic. Like, even if you're just doing a multiplex, a lot of major streets look like every other street in the neighborhood, just lined with 2-story houses like everywhere else. But I have a policy framework for when we go to committee of adjustment to say we can sever, we can semi-detach multiplexes, we can add a 4-story. Lots of flexibility comes into play. In MTSAs, this is very much emerging. The MTSA policy is now enacted in the official plan. It is not enacted in the zoning bylaw. So like Daniel Kolominski was saying earlier, we're going to be getting a draft of what the as-of-right zoning bylaw looks like in hopefully the next few weeks. For the time being, a lot of our major or MTSA projects are just going to committee. We have the official plan framework to justify it to planning staff and to the committee, and the forthcoming policy will make it easier and easier. For anyone prospecting for properties, this is another overlay you want to put on your MLS map. Major streets, MTSAs. When these various policies collide onto otherwise unusual residential projects, we're finding we have a much easier time getting density approved. A big one, and this is not City of Toronto, this is the Planning Act, we can now go 10% beyond all required setbacks. It's important to note that this does not apply to the separation requirement between your main building and your accessory dwelling unit, but any front, rear, or side yard setbacks, we can just go 10% past them and we don't need a variance for it. There's a bit of a wrinkle in that city staff don't really know if that applies to platforms and other elements of the building, but those are things we can pretty easily figure out. There are a whole bunch of other things that our clients are telling us we have to consider that I'm not an expert on. A big one is HST. If you don't know who Rami Moransky is, he should become your best friend. We're using renovation applications to use lawfully existing components of buildings to avoid committee of adjustment. That's all out the window. We have to be 100% new construction now in order to qualify for the purpose-built rental HST exemption. So all of our clients are just assuming they're new construction. That usually means committee of adjustment, but if you know you have to go, you might as well take advantage of it. MLI select points are changing. Talk to Jack, talk to Jaden, talk to all the energy modelers here, because apparently that's going to be a big deal. I think you're about to hear about that, right? And the OBC, I don't know if anyone was a victim of last year's steel stud debacle in multiplexes, but it caused a lot of us a lot of heartache and money. We figured that out. This year we have new problems with how the city is reviewing the Ontario Building Code with respect to multiplexes. It's very much emerging though, so steel stud detailing, we think we've figured out. All the architects in this room have been collaborating with the city to understand what kind of details the city wants to see. There are new problems we'll be figuring out this year, and I hope to tell you more at next year's summit. So, things to take away from this, it has been a phenomenal year. I know I've complained a lot about some of the shortcomings of these policies, but it is mind-boggling to think that we now have all of this policy framework to allow us to enact our projects. This did not exist at last year's Missing Middle Summit. I think we've got a lot of people in the room here to thank for that. We need to continue our advocacy. We need to continue being noisy and complaining to people. But let's also take a step back and remember how far we've come in just one short year. It's been a good year. And I think next year, when I put the 2026 dot on this timeline, it might be more evolution rather than revolution. But I think that's a good sign. We have new policy framework that's allowing us to do new things, and we should be grateful for it. If you want to talk about laneway houses or garden suites, contact me at the top. Information, multiplexes, custom homes, and apartments is at the bottom. Thank you, everybody.